The cabin froze the instant Brenda's hand cracked across Simone's cheek, high above the Rockies, every passenger staring in shock. Then Eli's voice cut the silence like a blade. You just struck the woman who owns this airline. In that heartbeat, power flipped upside down, and the real turbulence began. They say real power doesn't wear a name tag, and sometimes it walks in wearing sneakers. The tarmac at Montgomery Executive in San Diego was unusually quiet for a Wednesday morning. A cream-white Gulfstream G700 stood ready, its door open, and engines humming lightly in standby. Inside the polished cabin, flight attendant, Brenda Halston, adjusted the gold pin on her blazer, checking her reflection in the brushed metal galley wall. Everything about her posture said control. This was her territory. For 15 years, Brenda had worked private charters. She knew her clientele, celebrities, executives, old money, and she knew how to spot someone who didn't belong. So when she saw a woman in a navy hoodie, gray joggers, and worn-in running shoes walking across the tarmac alone, her instinct wasn't curiosity, it was doubt. The woman wasn't carrying a luxury handbag, didn't have an assistant trailing behind her, and her afro was tied in a loose puff not styled for optics. She wasn't even looking around like someone impressed by a private jet. She was just there, calm, casual, confident. Brenda leaned slightly to the younger flight attendant in the galley, Eli Ramirez, and whispered, "Do we have a last-minute passenger?" Eli checked the manifest on his tablet, tapped twice, and nodded. "Dr. Simone Avery, top of the list." Brenda blinked. That woman, Eli, didn't reply, just gave a small shrug. "It's confirmed." Simone stepped onto the jet like she'd done it 100 times, setting a slim black backpack in the overhead compartment and taking her seat near the front window, side legs crossed, phone in hand. She didn't demand champagne or ask for amenities. She didn't speak to anyone. Brenda watched her unsettled. She walked over slowly, putting on the smile she reserved for potential threats cloaked in manners. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, voice smooth like lacquered wood. "I'm afraid this is a private charter." Simone didn't look up from her phone. "I'm aware." "Then perhaps you can clarify who you're here with." Simone finally met her gaze. "I'm not here with anyone. I'm the client." Brenda didn't flinch, but the corners of her mouth tightened. "I'll need to see some ID." "Why?" Simone asked plainly. Brenda hesitated. "Standard protocol." Simone raised an eyebrow. "Your colleague already confirmed my name." "What protocol calls for double-checking only certain passengers?" Brenda's voice dropped a degree. "We just have to be careful. This flight is reserved for high-level clients." "And what do you think I am?" Brenda didn't answer. Eli stepped closer. "She's confirmed, Brenda. It's all good." Brenda nodded tightly but didn't step away. Her eyes scanned Simone again, from the faded cuffs of her hoodie to the sneakers with creased soles. Something didn't compute. Simone didn't fit the image Brenda had built in her mind of who gets to charter a jet, and that bothered her more than she was willing to admit. The doors closed. Pre-flight checks began. Simone remained composed, scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing out the window. Brenda busied herself in the galley, but her eyes kept drifting back to that seat. Her unease was rising. To her, silence wasn't elegance, it was defiance. Midway through the cabin check, Brenda stopped at Simone's row again. "Dr. Avery," she said, tasting the name like it didn't belong in her mouth. "I'm going to ask one last time. May I verify your credentials?" Simone sighed and looked up, expression cool. "You've asked enough." "This is a professional environment," Brenda said tightly, "and your attitude is starting to make others uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Simone echoed. "No one else has spoken to me. You're the only one uncomfortable." That stung. Brenda's face hardened. "We can resolve this outside the aircraft if necessary." Simone uncrossed her legs slowly and stood taller than Brenda by at least 2 inches. The cabin seemed to quiet, the hum of the engines fading behind the rising tension. Simone leaned in slightly. "Touch me and you'll regret it." Brenda scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Simone's voice was low. "No, it's a promise of consequences." Eli stepped forward. "Brenda, let's just—" But it was too late. Brenda reached out, grabbing Simone's wrist, not harshly, but with the entitled confidence of someone used to getting her way. And in one horrifying second, that turned into something else entirely. Brenda slapped her, a clean, sharp strike to the cheek. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Time stopped. Eli gasped. The pilot poked his head from the cockpit, eyes wide. A middle-aged couple seated near the back froze with their newspapers half folded. Simone didn't cry out. She didn't flinch. She just stood there with her hand to her cheek, blinking slowly. The stillness in the cabin turned into pressure. Brenda stepped back, breath catching. She was being aggressive. Eli interrupted, his voice shaking. Is Dr. Simone Avery, founder of Aerosite Technologies. She's the new majority owner of Meridian Elite. She owns this jet. Brenda's lips parted, but no sound came out. Eli's voice was louder now, more certain. You just assaulted the owner of the company that pays your salary. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was indicting. Simone lowered her hand. Her cheek was red, but her eyes were colder than steel. Brenda stood frozen, caught in a moment that would follow her for the rest of her career. Eli took a step towards Simone. Do you want us to delay takeoff, call it in? No, Simone said flatly. We fly. She should be removed from the cabin. Let her stay, Simone said, eyes still locked on Brenda. She's going to sit through this flight knowing exactly what she just did. That'll hurt more than anything I could say. Eli nodded once and turned away. Brenda stumbled back toward her jump seat like the air had thickened around her. No one spoke. No one breathed too loud. As the plane began its taxi, Simone returned to her seat, legs crossed, head resting lightly against the leather headrest. She pulled her phone back out, not to call anyone, just to scroll. It was so normal it felt surreal. The flight lifted smoothly into the California sky. 39,000 feet up, the cabin was silent. But it wasn't peace. It was a reckoning. The engines hummed steady over the Rockies, but the air inside the cabin remained heavy, thick with unspoken truths and the weight of what had just happened. Dr. Simone Avery sat in her seat, legs crossed, her cheeks still faintly red. Where Brenda's hand had struck, though the sting had already faded. What lingered wasn't pain. It was the clarity that always followed disrespect. She didn't need to rage. She didn't need to shout. Because the real reckoning wasn't in what had been done to her. It was in what she was about to do next. Brenda Halston sat stiffly in her jump seat at the front of the cabin, eyes locked on the bulkhead, hands folded tightly in her lap, like a student awaiting punishment. She didn't dare glance back, but she could feel the gaze of consequence bearing down on her with every passing minute. Eli Ramirez moved through the galley quietly, his motions extra cautious, as if afraid any sudden movement might fracture the thin barrier holding the tension in place. Finally, the cockpit door opened and Captain Morris Langley stepped out. Tall, composed, with 30 years of experience behind every step, he nodded once towards Simone. Dr. Avery, he said with the kind of tone reserved for generals and heads of state, would you join me in the conference suite? Simone didn't speak. She stood, tucked her phone into her pocket, and followed. They passed Brenda, who barely breathed as Simone moved by. The captain opened the door to the private conference room, motioned her in, and closed it gently behind them. Inside was sleek walnut trim, plush leather chairs, a tinted window showing endless sky. Simone took a seat at the head of the table. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around. She simply waited. We've confirmed everything, Langley said as he sat opposite her. Eli submitted a preliminary incident report. The cameras have it all. I've already been on with corporate. They're preparing an official statement. Simone gave a single nod. I expected as much. Langley shifted. They want to know what you'd like to do. Fire her? Simone asked, not with sarcasm, but as a factual possibility. He hesitated. It's an option. But not the right one, Simone said, and opened the slim leather folder she'd carried on board. Inside were pages marked with annotations, diagrams, policy drafts. She slid one across the table. This is what I was finalizing mid-flight. A structural reform policy for Meridian Elite. Equity, bias, training, accountability systems. Langley scanned it, eyebrows rising slightly. You were already working on this. I've been working on it since I bought majority shares last quarter. But today, she tapped the edge of the paper. Today gave it teeth. He exhaled slowly. You want to roll this out now? Effective immediately, she said. Brenda Halston will be placed on administrative leave. She'll undergo mandatory retraining. But more importantly, this isn't about her. It's about a culture that made her feel entitled to act that way in the first place. There'll be pushback, Langley warned. This touches union contracts, legacy staff, corporate inertia. Push harder, Simone said. They brought me in to modernize this company. That means accountability with backbone. Langley gave a small nod, then looked up. Do you want to press charges? Simone paused, fingers drumming once on the folder. No, that's not where the power is. Then where is it in what happens next? In who has to answer to a standard they never expected to be held to? Langley nodded again. You've got my full support, Dr. Avery. I know, she replied. You're one of the few in this company who never needed a resume to treat someone with respect. The door opened again 15 minutes later. Simone stepped out, first composed, eyes calm. Langley followed silent. Brenda stood the moment she saw them. Her mouth parted like she might say something, but Simone didn't give her that space. She walked past without a glance. The silence that followed wasn't avoidance. It was control. But before taking her seat, Simone turned her head slightly, just enough for her words to reach. You didn't question me because I was suspicious. You questioned me because I didn't look like power to you. Brenda's lips parted again, but nothing came out. The remaining hour of the flight played like a muted film. Brenda sat like stone. Eli moved only when necessary, and Simone flipped through the rest of her documents with the same focus she brought to every boardroom she'd ever commanded. It wasn't until the landing gear dropped that the cabin seemed to breathe again. The plane touched down at Teterboro with a gentle bounce, the tires meeting the tarmac like punctuation at the end of a sentence too long delayed. On the ground, a black Cadillac Escalade waited near the private terminal, two men in tailored suits standing nearby. Not security detail, corporate staff. Simone gathered her folder, stood and moved toward the exit. This time Brenda did speak. Dr. Avery, she said softly. Simone stopped, turned just enough to acknowledge her without yielding an inch of ground. Brenda's voice cracked. I want to apologize. Simone studied her. No, you don't. You want to feel better. I didn't know who you were. Exactly, Simone cut in, her tone cool. That's the only reason you're apologizing, because you think you hit someone who matters. The real question is what you would have done if I didn't. Brenda's throat worked as she swallowed hard. I made a mistake. You made a revelation, Simone corrected. One that speaks louder than any training manual. But let's see what you do with it. She turned again and walked down the stairs into the waiting SUV. No fanfare, no entourage, just purpose. Back in the cabin, Captain Langley approached Brenda. HQ has been notified. You're being placed on leave. HR will contact you for a debrief and enrollment in the retraining program. Brenda nodded, eyes glassy. Eli watched from the galley. She turned to him, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The damage was done. But outside, as the sun cut sharp across the tarmac and the door to the SUV closed behind Simone, something had already shifted. Not in the air, in the ground beneath them. And this time it wasn't just about one slap. It was about the system that had let it happen and the woman who was now rewriting the rules. 2 weeks had passed since the quiet thunderstorm at 39,000 feet, yet the impact hadn't faded, it had only deepened. At the Meridian Elite Training Center in Jersey City, the walls were sleek, the floor silent, and the air carried a different kind of pressure now. Brenda Halston sat alone in a small learning suite. No blazer, no gold pin, no heels, just a plain gray sweater, black slacks and sneakers that felt heavier than they should. Her Meridian badge had been replaced by a visitor tag that read, Trainee. Her eyes, once sharp with certainty, now scanned the screen in front of her with a mixture of shame and resolve. The video playing wasn't a corporate puff piece, it was raw and filtered. A series of clips, a black pilot explaining how he was questioned outside his own aircraft hangar. A Latina mother recounting the time she was asked to step aside on a plane because someone didn't believe she belonged in first class. A child with tears in her eyes whispering, "Why does the lady look scared when I sit next to her?" Brenda sat still, pen in hand, scribbling notes she wasn't even sure she'd keep. Her own face felt like it was being reflected back to her in every story, every sigh, every pause. Then the screen cut to black. A new video loaded, one she hadn't seen in the training packet before. It was Dr. Simone Avery seated at a minimalist desk, wearing a dark blazer over a soft tee. No jewelry, no frills, just clarity in her eyes. "If you're watching this," Simone began, "it means you work for a company I now lead. And that means we hold each other to a higher standard than we're used to. Brenda sat up straighter. Simone didn't blink as she continued. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it smiles, but it always shows. And when it goes unchecked, it grows into action, then policy, then culture. That's where we stop it. Brenda stared transfixed. I'm not here to punish you, Simone said, but to challenge you. To ask one question you need to answer every day you wear our badge. Did I treat someone better today because I saw who they really were, not who I assumed they were? The screen faded. No applause, no summary, just silence. Brenda closed her notebook slowly, her fingers resting on the cover like she was afraid to let go. She wasn't afraid of losing her job anymore. She was afraid of who she'd been while she had it. Across the country, a flight boarded quietly in Sacramento. A young black woman in her 30s stepped into the cabin wearing navy leggings, a long hoodie, and a pair of Converse high tops. Her locks were pulled back into a ponytail, her tote bag had a NASA patch on the side, and she moved with the quiet ease of someone used to being underestimated. Welcome aboard, Dr. Langston, the flight attendant said with a warm smile. Still or sparkling water today? Sparkling, thank you, doctor. Langston replied, a flicker of surprise in her voice, though she didn't show it. No extra questions, no hesitation, just a smile and respect. That moment was small, but it was different. Back in Jersey City, Brenda remained in the training room after everyone else had left. She pulled up her file on the learning tablet and requested an optional module, Restorative Leadership, How to Rebuild After Harm. The screen loaded slowly, and she waited not out of boredom, but out of humility. It was a long wait, but she didn't flinch, because she finally understood that healing isn't fast, and growth doesn't come with a certificate. The next morning, Brenda walked into the HR office, quietly holding a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter not of defense, not of denial, but of responsibility. She had written out every moment from that flight, every assumption, every action, every word. And at the end of the page, she'd written one line: I saw her, but I didn't see her humanity, and that was my failure. Across town at Meridian's Manhattan headquarters, Dr. Simone Avery stood before a boardroom of executives, half of whom had hoped she would just issue a press statement and move on. But she didn't. On the smartboard behind her was a slide titled, Culture Doesn't Shift by Accident. We don't get to act shocked when bias shows up on our jets, she said. We built the ladders that kept it climbing. But today we're burning those ladders down. A few execs exchanged nervous glances. One cleared his throat. Dr. Avery, won't this cost us talent retention? PR risk, Simone turned. It'll cost us more if we keep pretending to be elite without actually leading. This isn't about risk, it's about responsibility. She clicked the remote. A new slide showed internal data diversity and leadership 12%. Incidents flagged by employees undisclosed but rising. Exit interviews mentioning hostile culture, too many. Simone looked around the table. This company isn't just an airline. It's a reflection of who we believe deserves the sky. If we don't fix the ground we launch from, then we'll never fly as high as we pretend to. One by one, heads began to nod. Not all at once, but enough. Later that day, Simone received a message from the training center. Brenda had completed her modules, voluntarily added 3 more. She'd requested a mentor from the equity task force. She hadn't asked for her job back. She hadn't begged. She was learning, and that, Simone thought, was the point. The story wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about policy and pattern and people. A week later, Simone boarded a flight as a passenger, not a boss. She wore jeans, a hoodie, and no makeup. She kept her name off the manifest. The junior attendant greeted her with a smile, offered water, didn't flinch. Progress wasn't loud, but it was real, and this time it sat quietly in the seat, where it always belonged. Sometimes it's not the slap that leaves the deepest bruise, it's the silence before and after. The story of Dr. Simone Avery isn't just about one woman on one flight. It's about every moment someone was misjudged for how they looked, what they wore, or how quietly they carried their power. And it's a reminder that justice doesn't always come through anger or revenge. Sometimes it comes through grace, accountability, and bold structural change. The lesson here is clear: we must challenge our assumptions, especially the ones we make without realizing it. Prejudice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the form of doubt, hesitation, or exclusion. Sometimes it wears a uniform, smiles politely, and still denies someone dignity. That's why we must do more than just not discriminate. We must intentionally see people for who they are, beyond titles, outfits, and stereotypes. Dr. Simone Avery could have used her position to publicly destroy Brenda's career in a single press release. But instead, she did something more radical. She offered transformation. She didn't excuse what happened. She exposed it. She didn't forgive blindly. She created a system where accountability could lead to growth. And that's the kind of leadership the world needs more of. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told you didn't belong, let this story remind you that your value doesn't depend on someone else's recognition. You don't have to shout to be powerful. Sometimes just walking in with quiet dignity is enough to shift the entire room. And if you've ever been the one who judged too quickly, this is your invitation to reflect, learn, and change before you're forced to. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a name tag or flash a business card. It simply walks in and takes its seat wherever it wants. On behalf of everyone here at US Justice Story, thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for being part of a community that believes in dignity, fairness, and growth. We share these stories not just to entertain, but to wake something up in all of us. If this message touched you, if it made you think twice, or even made you feel seen, we invite you to subscribe, to share, and to stand with us as we keep telling the stories that matter. Until next time, take care of one another and remember, treat people right, especially before you know who they are.